For Canadian musical duo Whitehorse, they're not only married, they share 4 studio albums, a Juno Wid, children, and a collection of new songs for their latest album, Panther in the Dollhouse.
Let me in, let me in, let me underneath your skin. Oh, break my little heart.
This rock and roll album is a bold departure from their folk roots, instead getting political, singing about consent, sexual relationships, and harm reduction. Luke Doucette and Melissa Grelo join me now. Welcome, you guys. Thank you for being in studio.
Thank you very much.
It has already been a pleasure to talk to you both about your passion, not only for music, but also about what seems to be creating a better world. Can you take me into the story behind this album, Panther in the Dollhouse, and kind of where it came from?
Yeah, I mean, the record, for one, it's not, it's a very personal record, although it's not autobiographical, although we find things to relate to with all the characters that we write about. But, you know, on the last record, Melissa and I wrote a song called Evangelina, which sort of recast a sex worker as a superhero. It was a story that was inspired by Terry Jean Bedford in the case where she and 2 other women brought down the existing laws on sex work at the Supreme Court, which ushered in Bill C-36. And so that inspired us, and then Melissa wrote a song on the new record that sort of continues that story.
Yeah, and kind of delves into, you know, the flip side of that story, where, you know, if you push that work underground, it's you know, prohibition is going to create victims. Mm-hmm. So it kind of got a conversation going between us and talking about those things. We're definitely not experts, but we care about those issues, and we're telling those stories. So we've talked a lot about it, and it kind of sparked this idea to turn our album release into kind of an opportunity or a platform to keep this conversation going. And, you know, because there is still a lot of work to be done. So we invited some pretty inspiring people. Terry Jean Bedford, who, you know, Bedford versus Canada, she was at the helm of that court case. The amazing Dan Savage, who is our personal hero. And
Dan Savage has done a lot of work to destigmatize a lot of things around sexuality, but sex work is one of the things that he speaks so eloquently about. And just the harm reduction approach to things like sex work, or even the relationship that we as a society have with drugs, and the conversation about can you prohibit something, or do you reduce harm in some way or another. And these things are related, and they're things that are dear to our hearts, just because you look at the world around you and you think, well, maybe there's ways to make things easier for people who are more marginalized.
Well, they're human rights issues, so we should all care. We should all be involved.
And Luke, this comes from a personal experience with this story as well.
A little bit. I grew up in Winnipeg, and my mother worked really closely with sex workers. She's a nurse, and so she spent quite a bit of time working with an organization called POWER, which was Prostitutes and Other Women for Equal Rights. So she was doing outreach work on the streets of Winnipeg, and then she started an organization called the Sunshine House, which houses the Sex Workers Action Coalition, and their mandate is to decriminalize and destigmatize sex work. So I grew up with sex workers, active or retired, in and around my home as a child, not necessarily knowing that's who they were, and now I consider a number of them to be close family friends, and they're friends of my mother's, and they're people that, you know, were sitting at the kitchen table having coffee when I'd wake up in the morning. Oh, hi, how's it going? And so it's not an experience that everybody has. The ability to see somebody as a human being first, and not see them as a prostitute or first, you know, because it can really affect your ability to see somebody compassionately when you jump to a lot of conclusions.
For those who perhaps are surprised to hear this message coming from your album, I read a great quote from you guys in a recent interview that said, well, you shouldn't be surprised because you're folk singers, your roots come from folk, and that means storytelling.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. We're storytellers first. That's what we consider ourselves. And, you know, we're always seeking out those stories and being inspired by the world around us. And I feel like the protest song is rising up again, that we're in need of the protest song again. And I think on this record, we're tapping into that a little bit more than we have in the past.
The punk rockers have always said that when there's a Democrat in the White House, punk rock suffers. Because the artists, the liberals, are like, oh, well, they're complacent, they sit on their hands. But when there's a right-winger in the White House, punk rock rears its head.
Right. Well, it's rearing its head today. Anne-Marie had a question before the segment, wondering where the name of the album came from. We only have about 30 seconds left, but can you tell us?
Well, Panther in the Dollhouse, it was actually a dream that I had. I had a series of dreams of wild animals in strange locations, and that was one that just stuck with me. And to me, it's the place where animal instinct and social conditioning meet, that kind of exciting, uncomfortable place.
That sounds like the perfect descriptor for the album. You guys, thank you so much for being here, for this new music and the continued work that you're trying to do with your storytelling. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.